And here we are in our final week, or going into our final week of the history and philosophy of science. So welcome back. I want to do a little recap of week 5, preview of week 6, and talk about wrapping up the course a little bit. Okay, so to start with, I just want to talk a little bit about the discussions. I sent an email out. I think probably it's been a little bit confusing, the fact that we've had 2 discussions every week. I think that has probably confused things a little bit. And while most of you are doing the initial part of the discussion, the initial post, quite a few of you have been missing the reply part where you're supposed to reply to a classmate. And I consider that very important because what I want is I want this to be like a collaborative exercise where we actually learn from each other. And that does happen. I've been learning a lot from you guys as well. So read the other posts, other students' posts, and then reply. All you got to do is in the forum, click reply like this. If you're on Twitter, it's very easy also. If I'm on Twitter and I want to reply to somebody's post, I just go onto the post here and I click reply. It's as easy as that. By the way, I just found this little joke on Twitter here this morning, and it kind of applies to this. This is about what happens when the teacher asks if anyone wants to volunteer. And this is from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I thought that was pretty funny and actually kind of appropriate in this case when we ask. Sometimes teachers feel like that, and I know that you guys can probably relate to that kind of don't make eye contact feeling, right? But anyway, I have appreciated your posts so far, and many of them have been very interesting, and I'll mention a couple examples as we recap week 5 right now. Okay. Oh, the other thing, before we get to that, I want to talk again about grades. Make sure under course administration, you go to, and remember, if you don't see the administration block, it's because you must have clicked one of these buttons in the past, or I'm not sure where the defaults are. And make sure that you don't have any empty grades here or zeros. If you do, then you need to go back and resubmit that. Possibly it's that you didn't reach a 60% on that, or maybe if it's a discussion, you haven't replied to somebody yet. So let's look at this. This is a reflection paper that we're going to be writing this week. Make sure that you scroll down and read the rubric, okay? And then after you've already submitted a paper, you can look at the rubric and see what I score, how I scored you, and you can see any comments that I put on here. And then what I'll usually do is I'll either upload a file with comments on it that you'll be able to look at here too as well, or I'll send you a link to a Google Doc that I made. Sometimes, depending on what format you submit it in, I might upload it to Google so that I can make comments on it. Okay, so moving on to start with the relationship between science and technology. This generated some interesting discussions, and I think I kind of expected that because it's kind of tricky, right? In fact, I'm not so sure it's not really just an artificial distinction between science and technology. In fact, one of you pointed out that even simple technologies require knowledge of maybe even it's just a substance. This kind of came out in one of the Twitter discussions, that what if, how can you make a stone tool without knowing something about the rock and how it behaves? And isn't that a sort of science? Now, maybe some people wouldn't agree with that, but and aren't they kind of using the scientific method when they try maybe different ways of tapping the stone and that sort of thing? I don't know. I mean, I guess you can make a distinction there. And the article that we read on the symbiotic relationship by Mr. Wiens pointed this out, that there's, at the very least, there's a very close, inextricable, or you can't separate the two. There's a very close relationship between science and technology. He called it symbiotic. Symbiotic is like when two living things are in such close relationship, they're mutually benefiting from each other and mutually essential to each other. So that's what he says, and he uses the example of recombinant genetics. So how could we do genetic recombination with having not first discovered the structure of DNA and the nature of DNA? So there are definite examples of times when when pure scientific research has brought about new technologies. There's also examples, as he points out, like the microscope, where technologies have enabled pure scientific research. So it is a bit of a chicken and the egg sort of situation, which one of you posted this cute picture on Twitter as well. It's a bit of a chicken and the egg thing. They're both mutually dependent on each other, obviously. And maybe there's no real point to trying to point out which one is first. In fact, if you think about it, when Thomas Kuhn talked about science as problem solving, or normal science as problem solving. Now, if that's true, if science is kind of a method of problem solving, then isn't that sort of like a tool? I mean, could science itself be seen as a form of technology? I don't know. These are good questions, but I think it's good to think about, particularly because this whole issue, this whole discussion gets us thinking about why science is useful and what it does for us. Which brings us to the second kind of reading, which was actually listening to the abridged version of Sagan's Demon Haunted World. And what I wanted you to get out of this, or what I'd hoped, was that it would make you think about this kind of way of looking at the world that that came about during the scientific revolution, which we could call the scientific worldview, scientific method, this way of solving problems. And I think, and think about its impact on the world, how it's impacted life, how it's impacted the way that people think and learn. And it's hard to boil it down. If you want to say what is the scientific worldview, I think the easiest way to do it is to look at Kuhn and Popper, for example, and just say, what is this thing called science? What is this way of looking at the world? And the simplest definition is Popper's, where he says it's just conjectures and refutations. So you have a hypothesis, and then you attempt to refute it. So that's pretty simple, right? And then, of course, what we have to do is say, okay, well, it's not quite that simple, because what does it mean to refute it, and how do we do that? Well, we refute it in a couple of ways. We refute it primarily through experience, okay, or experiment. So we observe something, or we experience something, or we describe, we form an experiment to test something. We create an experiment to test it. We collect data, we take measurements. So that is a very important part of science. But we don't want to neglect the fact that reason is involved in all this as well. So we take kind of this approach where we apply reason to our experience, and we draw conclusions, okay? And we basically are making that our authority in terms of, what's true, what's not true, that sort of thing. That's what this approach is about. Okay, questions that a lot of interesting philosophical questions that can come up in discussions like this. Sometimes people will talk about, well, is that reliable? Maybe we don't really directly perceive reality as it really is. Maybe our experience isn't a reliable guide. Maybe reason isn't a reliable guide to reality. But I think that while those questions can be fun, I was at this debate once, and the two students it was kind of a tournament, and they were the top ranked debaters, and one of them kind of really surprised everyone when, instead of really debating the topic at hand, and I don't remember what it was something like environmental policy of the government, she said something like, or he said something like, well, we don't really know if we're actually here right now, and we can't prove, that we're actually here doing this right now. Kind of this question of what is reality and whether we perceive it or not. And I think she took kind of an effective approach, and she just basically dismissed that and said, well, if we're not, then why are we even bothering arguing this? So why don't we just stick to the argument as it was stated? And I think that's a legitimate argument. In fact, we can, I think we could say, if what we're saying is that we're going to use our experience and our reason, and then we're going to trust it and use it to make decisions, I think it's hard to argue against that. In fact, I think that pretty much everyone does that, even believers in pseudoscience, for example, witchcraft. I think they're all pretty much doing that. They're all using their reason, their way of thinking, and they're all using what they consider to be their experience, right? But I think what it is that they just don't really have a very accurate picture of their experience. In some cases, because they're not maybe controlling their variables, for example, or there's some flaw in their logic, right? Or maybe they're purposely ignoring something. If you think about it, think about Thomas Kuhn's descriptions of the times of paradigm shift, when there are lots of practitioners, lots of scientists who will stick to their guns, like Joseph Priestley stuck to the phlogiston theory, I believe even to his death, refused to see the mounting evidence against it and to apply it, refused to admit that he was wrong. So this is the sort of thing that the book was about, I think. And so I guess what I'm really saying is what it's about is not necessarily is this a different way of really looking at things. I think that we probably all use experience and reason in some way. What it's about is are we doing it effectively? And what happened in the scientific revolution is that people came up with some really effective ways to do this. Primarily what we'd call controlled experiments, measurement, recording things, that sort of thing. Okay, so which brings me to my final point up from week 1 through week 5, which is that I think it's really all about paradigm. That is that we all operate within a paradigm, within a way of looking at our problems, at the world. And what can happen over time is that anomalies start to build up in our system, in our way of looking at it. And at some point, those anomalies might build up and push us over the edge into a paradigm shift. And it's interesting that the whole scientific revolution itself is or was really a paradigm shift for society as a whole, and for whoever bought into it. So that's kind of interesting that the whole scientific revolution itself can be seen as a paradigm shift. And speaking of paradigms, we're going to read a portion of a book in this next week by Ray Kurzweil called The Singularity is Near. And he uses the word paradigm in a little bit different way. He uses it kind of in a broader sense, not just about your worldview, but about a change in the general way of doing things. Like there could be a technological paradigm, for example, like computers could be seen as a paradigm or computation. So we're going to see that word used this week as well. So week 6, we're really going to look at the history of science and the way that science changes, and we're going to use that to extrapolate into the future. So think about this. If you took that graph that you made in week 1 and you extrapolated it into the future, in other words, trace the graph and keep going in time, what would you get? You get this steeply increasing curve that basically just seems to shoot up to infinity, right? Well, that's the concept that we're going to be talking about this week. And we're going to be using, to do this, we're going to be using a book by a man named Ray Kurzweil, and he is an inventor. He was instrumental in developing speech and text recognition software. And he's also currently the director of Google's artificial intelligence labs. So pretty influential guy, and has written a number of controversial books. And I'm not going to give you too many hints on this because I really want you to do the viewing and readings. What I do want to do is describe that. For the movie, there are actually 2 options. So he's produced 2 separate documentaries. The first one is option 1, and you don't have to watch both of them. They're both full-length movies, so they're about an hour and 20 minutes long, each of them. You can pick which one you watch. I'll just tell you that option 1 has kind of a plot to it, as well as being a documentary. It's kind of like a cross between a movie and a documentary. And number two is straightforward documentary. So you can take you can do either one, but make sure you watch one of them, because I'm going to be expecting you to reference them in your assignments this week. And the second is a required reading. This is actually the book, The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil, and I'm wanting you to read, requiring you to read pages 24 to 43. So that's a portion of the first chapter of the book, which gives an overview of his views, his predictions. And then for week one, or for assignment one this week, I want you to have a discussion on Twitter or the forum about whether he's being scientific. Is this concept of the singularity scientific according to what we've learned in this class, and why or why not? So that's your first assignment. The second is going to be a reflection paper, kind of like you did last week in week 5. This time you're going to be reflecting on the readings and video this week. And just to emphasize here, as was true last week and in the whole course, you don't have to agree with these readings. As I mentioned, there are questionable things in here, things that lots of people have criticized. And certainly you can look up criticisms on the internet and things like that. So you don't have to agree here. I am going to be looking for you to use references and evidence from the readings or the movies. And then lastly, this week, this one is not necessarily related to this week's readings, and that is a course reflection post. So I'd like you to post something that the most impactful thing that you have gotten out of this course or learned from this course, and that's the final part of the assignment. And then the last thing is the final Friday feedback. I'm going to ask that you all do this. I want to see what you thought about the course, what I could improve next year, next time I teach it, that sort of thing. As I mentioned, I've really enjoyed reading your assignments, your submissions, and your posts on the internet. You all have had some very interesting things to say, and I love seeing the way that different people react to these different things, and what you see as important, and the insights that you have. I've learned a lot from you, so I appreciate that. I will post a final video next week. I'll be away at the end of this week and this weekend, but I'll be doing the grading next week and wrapping that all up. If you've got work that you would still like to submit, you can do that. You can do resubmissions for a week after the end, so you can do those the week after next as well, and I'll still accept them. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, have fun this week.